Hi, it's Mark Owen from Moose Marketing and PR, the editor of Punchline magazine, and welcome to Punchline Talks, the big interview. Today, my guest is Simon Bernstein. He's the CEO of Longfield Community Hospice. Simon, welcome to Punchline Talks.
Hi, Mark. Thank you.
Well, look, just let's start at the very beginning, please. Can you tell us a little bit more about Longfield Hospital Trust? How many employees you got? What's the turnover? What do you actually do?
Okay, so Longfield Community Hospice is a Gloucestershire-based charity, and I suppose our mission is to enable people in Gloucestershire diagnosed with life-limiting conditions to live well and die comfortably, and their families and carers to feel supported throughout that whole process.
How long have you worked at the company?
I have been there almost 3 years. I joined in November 2019. So it's been quite a challenging time since I joined. I was only here 6 weeks when my father, who'd been ill for quite a long time, died. And we had a good death at home in London. He'd had dementia and Parkinson's for quite a long time. And then I think 2 weeks after that, I hosted Prince Charles, our patron here at the hospice, on his biannual tour. And then, of course, in March 2020, we all know what happened, don't we? So it's been an interesting and challenging time, but lots of fun too, I have to say. So do you want me to say a bit more about the hospice and our work?
Yes, please, yeah.
Yeah, so I suppose we've got three main aims to try and achieve that overall mission. The first one is to provide well-being support for people diagnosed with a life-limiting illness. And we want that diagnosis to be as early as possible for them and for them to be referred to us. Got these amazing facilities, really superb facilities at the hospice where I am today, just near Minchinhampton. Really fantastic gardens, calm, lovely rooms, doing all sorts of things with people. We provide therapeutic art, horticultural sessions, we call them Fork and Talk. We provide we will provide physiotherapy. We will soon be providing occupational therapy and all sorts of relaxing things like complementary therapy, aromatherapies, that kind of thing. And we provide psychological support as well and spiritual support to people with a whole range of trained staff. And the idea of that at the Wellbeing Centre is really to try to enable people to live as well as they possibly can with their life-limiting condition. It's about rehabilitation, so it's about feeling good in yourself, emotionally, psychologically, but also functioning well as you possibly can physically. We try and help with both sides of those things. So we do that here at the Wellbeing Centre. That's the first thing we try to do. And then the second main area of our work is about caring for people at the end of life through our hospice at home service. Most people think that hospices are places to come and die, and that Longfield, like many other hospices, has an inpatient unit and beds, and we don't. To my knowledge, we've been here over 30 years and no one has ever actually died at Longfield Hospice. What we try to do is to care for people in their own homes, which is where most people want to die, surrounded by their loved ones if they possibly can. And we do that through our hospice at home service. So we've got teams of people going out in the community across different parts of Gloucestershire to look after them at the end of their lives. And we support family members too as part of that. So that's the second part of what we do. And I'm really keen, one of our aims of our new strategy is to try and care for more people at the end of life, because we know that not enough people are receiving that service when they want to. And then the third of our main aims is to provide more support to families and carers, the loved ones of people with life-limiting conditions. And we can do that at the hospice here as part of that wellbeing work. And partly that might involve counselling and bereavement support after the loved one has died. But we're also here, once somebody's been diagnosed, family members can refer themselves for support and advice. So we will offer advice on things like dietary needs of their loved ones, because people with particular conditions might need certain diets. We'll help them with counselling before a loved one dies, and we'll provide peer support. So we ran an amazing support cafe the other day at the hospice, and we had 47 carers turn up. Carers cafe. It was really very, very successful. And we want to do more of that kind of thing, because I think people who provide care for family members who have life-limiting conditions take an amazing burden on themselves. It's really difficult physically and psychologically, particularly if you're an older person trying to look after another older person. So we do everything we can to help them do the things they need, but to feel supported and get all the advice that they need, and to be able to talk to peers in a similar situation, because that can really help people. Those are the three main things we try to do.
The thing about us Brits is that we don't really like to talk about death too much, do we?
No.
And I don't know if you know, but my brother died of cancer 6 years ago, and it was
sorry.
No, that's okay. He was estranged from the family, and I had to try and glue us all back together again, and hadn't talked to him myself for 2.5 years. And I remember going to talking to an organisation. I remember them saying to me that it's okay to grieve for someone when they're alive. And that was the best bit of advice that they could possibly give me, because I wouldn't understand why I would be in a shower and I'd just be crying, or I'd wake up in the morning, or I'd just be driving and suddenly I'd feel this terrible sadness. And my mother and father took over, once I got them all back together again, they took over that caring, and it really took it out of them, actually. And I do think it was one of the things why my father died around 18 months later, because they both looked after my brother, and then my mum got COVID. Anyway, it's a different thing. So unfortunately, I've seen my fair share of grief.
I think many people have, though, haven't they? And when as a society, you're right, we're not very good about talking about death. Often people are good at maybe giving flowers and saying a few words when something first happens, but sometimes it's
sorry to stop you there. Are they good at saying things? I don't think they are.
Well, in a limited way. Yeah, in a limited way, they'll maybe say sorry for your loss, and they'll maybe drop some flowers into the house, or they might attend the funeral and say a few words. But I think you're right. Not everybody does that, but I think it's those. Sometimes that happens for a few weeks afterwards, and then it kind of drops away, and people are left very much on their own. I think that's very difficult, and we're certainly not, as a society, very good at talking about death. Or about grieving, or understanding people's grief, and there are all kinds of different ways in which people grieve, and not everyone's the same, and we have to recognise that, and we can't expect everyone to behave in the same way, or keep that stiff upper lip that the Brits are supposed to have. I don't think that's a very healthy way to approach life myself.
No, and also people, one of the things I've learned over the years is that there's no defined time span. So some people I know have been grieving for like 15 years. My mother handled it in a way that was, Dad's died, we got to get on with things. And if anybody invites me out, I'm going to go, because I know those invitations will dry up. And so that's what she did. And, for like 18 months, she went out and did everything like she could. So how did you fall into this job? What did you do beforehand, Simon?
Well, I don't know. I could talk about the most recent job, but my career has been almost exclusively in the charity sector for over 30 years. There were a few years where I worked in the public sector. I grew up in London. I grew up in East London, and my dad was a university teacher. My mum worked in social services. I suppose I was bound to end up in some kind of caring area. It's just it's my belief, I guess. I went to a comprehensive school in East London, went to university, and thought, what do I want to do? And I first started working on summer play schemes on my local high-rise estate, and I was just a worker initially, and then they asked me to run the whole play scheme. So we were doing stuff like taking about 250 children, young people, and their parents, down to Southend-on-Sea or Clacton or Butlins, and to Thorpe Park Water Centre, and taking them swimming and doing outdoor activities and games. I sort of fell into youth work, and loved it, but that was just the summer holidays. I came out of university in the late 80s, and it was a bit like now, to be honest, in the midst of a recession, really high unemployment, really challenging time, and I was on the dole for a while. And it was tough, I can tell you. So I can really, sympathise with what some people are going through currently, and are probably going to go through over the next couple of years here. And then I kind of, did get a job eventually. Worked on an adventure playground in Brixton. I got a job, really strange job with Hammersmith and Fulham Council, with a couple of guys. We were designing and building inflatables and taking them around the parks of Hammersmith for kids to bounce on in school holidays. Really crazy job. And from that, I just thought, you know, I enjoy working with children, but there's something about all the cuts in local authorities, and you know, they were closing operations down for play schemes and things. So I applied for this job at the NSPCC, and I think I kind of blagged my way in, Mark. I've always had a bit of imposter syndrome, I guess, because of, you know, can't go to comprehensive school, and you know, I just issues around being Jewish, although not religious, but being bullied at school for being Jewish, and you know, just you kind of I had to push myself sometimes, and I got this job at the NSPCC. I think they took a chance on me because I didn't really have the experience they were looking for, but I guess I talked my way in. And I got a job as a communications officer, and they just took a chance on me. But it was one of those organisations, a large organisation, this was in 1990, and they just, one of those places where they gave people opportunities. I worked with this amazing guy who I think, you know, I'd probably call him, you know, my guru, if you like. This guy called Giles Pegram, who was the director of appeals. He's the man behind the Full Stop campaign that the NSPCC ran a few years ago, where they raised £250 million. Absolute genius. He's retired now, but he just gave me all these opportunities. So they would say, do you want to write a script for Princess Margaret? She's speaking at the next AGM. And I was like, I have never done anything like that before. They just said, well, that's okay, don't put any jokes in. And I put a joke in, and they let it through, and she used the joke, and it got a laugh. So I thought, okay. They had me working with Noel Edmonds. At the time, he was running his Saturday evening show with the Gunge Tanks and Mr. Blobby. And so he came up with this idea to get secondary school children to get sponsorship, raise money in order to have their teachers gunged. So we had all these Gunge Tanks going around the country to raise money for the NSPCC. It was crazy stuff. But they would just, you know, they'd say, oh, we want to make a video. Would you want to direct it and write the script? Yeah, okay, I'll do that. And I think one of the things I learned from being at NSPCC is just give people opportunities. They'll sink or swim, and if they swim, it will be fantastic for the organisation. It'll be fantastic for their confidence. And I think I learned a lot being at NSPCC. Then I went to Friends of the Earth.
Why did you leave?
I've been there 5.5 years, and by the time I left, I was the communications manager. So I was responsible for all the branding and communications. I'd done fundraising projects for them. But you know what? I think it was a bit of that imposter syndrome. I thought I was kind of making up being a manager. I didn't really quite know what to do. So I decided to leave, and I put myself through a Master's in Business Administration at Imperial College. So my partner and I were lucky enough to have a house in London, and we took a lodger in, and I cycled everywhere and lived on sandwiches because it was, you know, expensive, and couldn't afford the tube even. And I did a year full time doing an MBA, which was really interesting, really fantastic. I learned a lot there. And then I went on to Friends of the Earth, which at the time was my dream job. Sort of mid-90s, I was really into environmental issues. I'm somebody that has to feel very passionate about the cause that I work for. I got a job there as the Director of Communications and Fundraising at Friends of the Earth, and that was an amazing place to be as well. Being part of a campaigning pressure group was great, and we were talking about climate change back then, and having small successes here and there. Things have moved on quite a lot since then, obviously.
What was the biggest lessons you learned there?
Well, funny enough, it's one of the lessons I was going to talk about later, maybe. It's about picking your battles, whether they're external or internal. So maybe I can say more about that.
You can. Your top three business tips. We can come back to that if you like. Okay, so you were at Friends of the Earth. How long for? And then where?
I think I was there for about 5.5 years, and by that point we'd got a young son, and we'd had friends who'd moved to Stroud and come from Cheltenham originally, and we used to come down here from London, to come walking. Beautiful part of the country. Used to come down to Stroud, and we really fell in love with the place, and just I think we got a bit fed up with life in London, how competitive it was and how expensive it was. And we both just left our jobs without anything to go to. Sometimes you just take those chances. And so my partner, she'd been a university teacher. She specialises in science education. She got a job at University of West of England in Bristol straight away, and I got a job. I set up as a consultant, basically, working with and for charities, and I did that for about the next 13 years, you know, that was great. I worked for all sorts of charities. I went back to Friends of the Earth for a year, which was very strange. It's 8 or 9 years later. But I worked for Sustrans, for Home Farm Trust, Learning Disability Charity. I worked for the Ramblers, Livability, a disability charity. There were all sorts over the years that I worked for, and that was great. I also worked for Longfield Hospice when it was called Cotswold Care Hospice. I did some consultancy with them for about 18 months, so I had a connection to the hospice before I joined. But I got a bit bored. I worked with other people, and I worked within organisations. I did lots of interim roles as well. And I got a bit bored with it though, being on your own. I want to be back inside, because you often go in and you'll review things for organisations, and you'll give them recommendations, or you'll produce a strategy, and then you kind of walk away, or they ask you to do bits and bobs around that. But you're never really owning anything and seeing it through, and I guess I missed that. So I was looking around for more permanent jobs, and I applied for a role with a social care charity in Bristol called Alive. And I became their CEO in 2016. I was there for about three years, and we worked with older people in care homes, in probably about 350 care homes across the southwest of England. And we went in trying to deliver meaningful engagement for those people, because often there's not much activity on for them. So we would use iPads, we'd do storytelling, we'd play games, we'd use music and dance, reminiscence, and all kinds of objects for reminiscence. And we train the staff in the care homes on how to do that too. It was a lovely organisation, great organisation. I hated the commute from where I live to Stroud. Sometimes, you know, 2 to 3 hours a day could be both ways. And
yeah, Stroud of Bristol, that's not an easy drive.
You can't get a train. You have to drive. It's not easy with all the traffic. And then the job at Longfield came up, and I hadn't just had that connection with the cause through the consultancy I did for them previously, but I mean, my mum had I think a really what I call a bad death in 2011. Her and my dad had come down to stay with us for Christmas in 2010. She'd had breast cancer previously. She'd had a mastectomy about 5 years before. When she came down, she looked really ill, really thin, just being sick. And she told us that she'd been to see her GP. She'd got, you know, some lumps in her breast, and he dismissed them as cysts. So they're just cysts, don't worry. So, you know, after Boxing Day, I took her into Cheltenham Hospital, and she was admitted. And, you know, soon afterwards, you know, didn't find out very good news, but she found that out on her own, that she got secondary cancer. It spread, and you know, no one was asked to be with her at that time, and she kind of called us in. So you know, I've got a brother and a sister. They came, and my dad was still staying with me after Christmas. I took him in, and obviously, you know, we weren't looking forward to seeing it. What did she want to tell us about? And we sat around the bed, and she began to tell us what she'd been told, and the ward sister said that we couldn't have the conversation around the bed, and she told us that we had to go out into the corridor. So we had to sit in a public corridor with people walking past, where my mum broke the news to us that she had, you know, 3 or 4 weeks to live. So we were all just in floods of tears in that corridor. It was just one of the most awful experiences I could think of. And then she couldn't get out of hospital quickly, and it just, I won't give you more details, but it just was grim and unpleasant, and it really made me realise what it can be like for people at the end of their lives, whether they're at home or in hospital. Getting that support around you and having the empathy of professionals and understanding, as well as the medical support you need, is so important. And all too often, partly because of lack of resources, sometimes to do with training, it doesn't happen as it should. And I think that was a rare experience that we had. I like to think that nowadays things have moved on and they're a bit better. But when that job came up at Longfield, where I am now, I was like, yeah, this one's for me. Like I said, I have to feel really passionate about the cause I'm working for.
It's funny because my brother, even though he'd had all this trouble with my mum and dad, he managed to get into a small little hospital in Beccles, and we're all there when he passed away. And and he had a pretty good death, all the medical stuff. My dad had a terrible time in NHS hospital, and my mum had COVID, and I was there for 13 hours with her in a COVID ward, which is why I got COVID myself so seriously. That was dreadful. So I know what you mean. Well, in certain aspects, it's just dreadful.
Yeah.
But you guys do. You've got a great reputation. The company's got a great reputation. So for being a marketing director and a marketing guru, what's the lessons you learned from being a CEO and the difference of suddenly having a big organization? You've got 4.7 million turnover. You've got 145 staff. What's one of the lessons you've learned from that?
Yeah, I think that was a challenge. I mean, I had that challenge initially when I went to my last charity Alive, and in a way that was quite a good stepping stone to somewhere like Longfield, because it was a smaller charity. Although we worked across lots and lots of care homes, the number of staff was much smaller, and it was smaller turnover. So I kind of had that stepping stone as a CEO before coming to Longfield. I think that was really good grounding for me to kind of make that change. And I think it's about, as a marketing or fundraising director, you're still only running part of the organization, even though with something like marketing, you do have to oversee all the branding and positioning and media and that sort of thing. But you're not responsible for such a wide span of work. And I think that's the difference. And at my last organization, because it was much smaller, I was doing a heck of a lot of stuff myself. But I also suppose I had that, the benefit of being a consultant, self-employed for 13 years, was that you have to do everything yourself then. So, and doing a Master's in Business Administration, I knew quite a lot about quite a lot of different things at a surface level. I wouldn't claim to be an expert in all areas. So I think it was about adapting to the large organisation. I think one of the biggest issues was there's so many more people, getting to know everyone's names and what they all do, and whether they're doing the right things in the right way. I think that's one of the hardest things about a big organisation like this. It's one of the best things, and one of the worst things are the people. I love working with people, but people can also be one of the biggest challenges that you face.
Sorry, people can be an absolute nightmare, from struggling over their desk size to moving up chairs.
Absolutely.
Bloody, I don't know about you, but I think managers, owners nowadays, they've got to be psychiatrists, they've got to be leaders, they've got to be your friend, they've got to be so many different hats. And the MDs and the chief execs I talk to, it's always the people that make the job. They make it good, and they make it bloody awful sometimes.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that was quite hard for me coming here as CEO was that you're the figurehead of the organisation. And I'd never worked in the healthcare sector before. I'd never worked with the NHS. I might have worked with local authorities. I might have worked with national government. I'd never worked with the NHS. And understanding the whole healthcare sector, and within a hospice, a number of policies that you have to have, and the amount of regulation that there is, and you've always an edge, because when will the Care Quality Commission come in for an inspection? And that's a whole new way of working that I've had to get used to. And as the person leading the organisation, you've got to be on it. And that was a very steep learning curve for me, I'd say. But people are a big challenge, like you say. They're also one of the best things about working in an organisation. I think it's you've got to. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to ask you really about moving forward, because we don't have, we are going to run out of time very shortly. Would you believe already? We've just gone through COVID. Now we're going through cost of living crisis. It means that charity fundraising is going to be hit. This is what you're all about. You've got to raise as much money as possible. I mean, how much money do you need to raise a year? And how do you think, what's happening with cost of fuel and everything else is going to affect you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be very, very challenging for us and all charities across Gloucestershire and the whole country, no doubt about it. Sometimes you're competing with international causes and crises across the world. We know what's going on in Ukraine at the moment and elsewhere. But I think Yeah, the cost of living crisis is going to be a real big one, the threat of recession. I mean, where our money comes from is sort of two, maybe three main areas. We receive a small amount of money from the NHS. It's usually about 15% of our income, that's all. So all the rest, the other 85%, has to be raised through our shops, of which we have 19 across Gloucestershire, and also an e-commerce operation. And that brings in about £2.6 million a year.
Wow, £2.6 million
yeah,
online.
Yeah, no, sorry, not online. That's not online. That's the 19 shops and the e-commerce together, 2.6. It'd be lovely if that was just the e-commerce, wouldn't it? And about £1 million or so comes from our fundraising. And I guess one of the things that gives us reasonable levels of confidence is the fact that often in times of hardship and recession, people do more shopping in charity shops because it can be a bit cheaper. We are a little bit worried about whether we'll get the goods donated that we normally donate. Maybe people will hang on to stuff and won't buy so many new clothes and have a clear out. So that is an issue. But hopefully, you know, in past recessions, charity shops usually tend to hold up quite well. I think it's much more challenging on the fundraising side, where we depend quite heavily on community events and events that we put on, or people doing their own challenge events, because it's all about sponsorship and people spending money at events and taking part in them. And that's a bit of an unknown at the moment. We don't really know how that's going to be. We get money from trusts and foundations, and they're usually very good at stepping up. They stepped up fantastically well for us during the COVID pandemic, where we obviously had to close down a lot of our operations, and we couldn't run any fundraising at all to speak of, apart from online. So, I mean, we've got money, we get money from legacies, so gifts of people's wills, but you never quite know what you're going to get each year. So I think in the years before I joined, and the year in which I joined, 2019-20, I think we had very low amounts of legacy money. I think the year I joined, it was about £50,000-60,000, that was all. In the last 2 years, we've had a bit more like 350,000, I think it is. Wow. But you get notifications of legacies, but you don't always know how long it's going to take to process estates and that kind of thing. But I think we've been quite careful with our finances over the last couple of years because of COVID, and we've reviewed the levels of reserves that we have and made sure that we are reasonably well insulated. You know, we weren't expecting inflation of 10% and all those costs going up, like you said, of energy costs and travel. We're lucky we've got our energy, gas and electricity fixed till October 2023. I know the government have made announcements today. I haven't heard the details, but I think we're going to be okay for the moment on the energy side. But yeah, petrol costs are going up too. I think we're okay so long as people keep fundraising for us and people keep using our shops. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, that's what you need, isn't it? You need people to go. I go to your charity shops all the time, by the way, and I do donate as well. And I love charity shops. I just really into that. I was speaking to Talitha Nelson, and she doesn't buy anything new. Everything is secondhand. Yeah. She's telling me. I'm sure she won't mind me mentioning that. Do you know what? We're nearly running out of time already, Simon. So I'm going to have to ask you. I'll ask you first. One personal question is: what's the last CD you bought, or the last piece of music that you bought?
CD. That's really old school. I haven't bought a CD for years, but
maybe I'm old school, mate.
Yeah. I used to buy loads of vinyls. Well, I listen to a lot of stuff on Spotify, to be honest, rather than buying stuff these days. So I've been listening to there's all sorts of stuff. I listen to a band called sort of DJ's band called Salt, SAULT, sort of black group with quite political lyrics, which is really good. I mean, I went to see Elvis Costello at the Forum in Bath a few weeks back. I have got a really eclectic music taste. I like all kinds of things: soul, jazz, African, indie, a lot.
Fantastic. I'm a big Elvis Costello fan as well, by the way. Love him a bit. Well, Simon, I've got to finish off with your top 3 business tips, please. What can you tell us?
Okay, so I had to think about these, and my first business tip is be a magpie. So magpies are birds that are known for having a love of shiny things, and they'll often sort of steal those shiny things, you know, small bits of jewelry or things, shiny things lying around on the ground, they'll steal. And so the reason I say be a magpie is because I think I'm not saying steal ideas. What I'm saying is have a look around for what's out there already and borrow ideas from other people and other organisations, because I think it's really difficult to come up with original ideas, and people beat themselves up to be, you know, innovative and come up with something new. But actually, you can create something new by looking at what other people are doing, not just in your sector but elsewhere, and sometimes more than one thing, and combining those. So, you know, I'll go back to NSPCC. I came in, I was asked to produce all these school fundraising materials, and they just wanted me to update them. And so what I did, instead of just updating them, I said, right, let's have some cartoon characters on the materials that are used by children to raise sponsorship, but let's also tie the materials into the national curriculum, because the national curriculum had just been introduced, no one else was using it. So all of our fundraising materials for schools had an element of the curriculum in them, and that meant that teachers were much more likely to use them. So it gave us a competitive advantage. There was nothing new in that particularly. I just stole things from other places. So that's my first one, be a magpie.
Okay, second one?
Second one, empower your staff. I definitely believe that, you know, one person doesn't hold all the good ideas. Anyone can have a good idea, not just people at the top of an organisation. I suppose that's something I learned at NSPCC as well. Of course, you need the leader of an organisation to provide a clear direction, and you've got to motivate people to try and achieve the mission. But then if you can give people enough latitude to kind of find their own way to achieving that, I think you get much more out of people. And you have to allow people to make mistakes. And sometimes that's really difficult as a leader. But as long as they're learning from the mistakes, rather than carrying on making them, which obviously becomes a problem, I think that's how people grow. And I think you get much more out of people, and therefore organisations can achieve more if you empower them. So that's my second one. And then my third one is a really simple one, which is, as a CEO, it can be a really lonely job. Yeah, you might have your senior management team around you, or you know, chair of the board, but actually you need a support network, because you can't say all the things you necessarily want to those people within your organisation. So having some peers, other CEOs and other organisations who you can use as sounding boards, as benchmarks, and just get advice from and offer advice, that's absolutely invaluable as a support for what can be quite a lonely job.
Simon Bernstein, CEO of Longfield Hospice. Thanks ever so much for joining Punchline Talks. Always great to see you, Simon. All the very best.
Thank you, Mark.
Oh, goodbye.